I saw his body crumble to dust right in front of my eyes. The prince was no longer human. My name is Abina, and this is the story of how I came to know the truth about Prince Adu, a man consumed by power, greed, and something far worse. It's a story that people in my village whisper about, but they don't tell it fully. They are too afraid. I'm the only one who saw it all, and I'm the only one left to remember. Prince Adu was the king's son. Everyone said he was blessed. He was tall, handsome, and always surrounded by wealth and women. People called him charming, but I never liked him. His smile was too wide, his eyes too sharp. It was like he was always looking for something he couldn't find. From the day he became a man, the village changed. The king grew weaker and the prince grew stronger. His words had power. He could convince anyone to do anything. Women threw themselves at him. Men followed him like dogs. My father told me not to speak of it, but the truth was clear. The prince was not like other men. One night, my cousin Afia disappeared. She was just 16. She was beautiful, and she had caught Prince Adu's eye. She told me she was afraid of him. He would stare at her for too long, his smile never reaching his eyes. "He wants something from me, Abena," she whispered one day. "I can feel it." That night, the prince sent for her. My uncle begged her not to go, but you can't say no to Prince Adu. They found Afia's body 3 days later, lying at the edge of the river. Her face was pale, and her eyes were wide open, as if she had seen something terrible before she died. They said it was the spirits, but I knew better. It wasn't just Afia. Other girls began to disappear. Girls who were taken to the palace and never came back. People whispered that Prince Adu was cursed. They said he made a deal with something dark. He wanted power and he was willing to trade anything for it. I never wanted to believe it. I wanted to stay far away from the prince and his palace. But then it happened to me. One evening, I was fetching water near the river when I saw him. Prince Adu was standing there watching me. He wore a fine robe, but it was torn at the edges. His face looked different. He was pale, too pale, and his smile, it wasn't right. "Abena," he said softly, "come here." I froze. My whole body felt heavy, like I was sinking into the ground. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. He took a step towards me, his bare feet silent against the dirt. I saw his eyes clearly then. They were black, not dark brown like the rest of us. They were black like the night sky with no stars. "Come," he said again, his voice low and soft, like a snake. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Then I heard it. A whisper, faint and chilling, coming from behind him. I couldn't see anyone else, but I knew something was there. Something with him. "Leave me alone," I managed to choke out, my voice shaking. He stopped, his head tilting slightly, and for a moment I thought he might let me go. But then he smiled, wide and sharp, and he opened his mouth to speak, and I swear I saw teeth that didn't belong to a man. They were jagged, like an animal's. I turned and ran. I don't know how I did it, but I ran faster than I ever thought I could. I heard him laughing behind me, a laugh that echoed in my ears long after I reached home. That night, I told my father what happened. He looked terrified. "Do not speak of this again, Abena," he warned. "The prince is not a man anymore. He made a pact with the forest spirits." I didn't sleep that night. I could feel something watching me, something waiting outside my window. For days I stayed in the house. I didn't go near the river or the palace, but then everything fell apart. People in the village began to die. First it was the girls who had escaped the palace. Then it was the men who served the prince. Their bodies were found near the river, pale and hollow, as if something had drained the life out of them. The king fell sick, and no one saw Prince Adu for days. Finally, a group of elders decided to confront him. My father was one of them, and I went with him. I shouldn't have, but I couldn't stay away. I had to know the truth. We entered the palace, and it was silent. Too silent. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on us. When we reached the prince's chambers, the door was open. Inside, we saw him. Prince Adu was sitting on the floor, surrounded by bones. human bones. His robes were torn and his skin looked dry like old leather. When he looked up, I gasped. His eyes were gone, just empty black holes where they used to be. "What have you done?" one of the elders shouted. Prince Adu laughed, but it didn't sound like him. It sounded like many voices speaking at once. "I did what I had to do," he said. His voice was broken and hollow. "They gave me power, and now they want me back." The air in the room turned cold, and we heard whispers coming from everywhere. The shadows on the walls began to move. My father grabbed my arm and pulled me back, but I couldn't stop watching. Prince Adu began to scream. His body shook violently, and his skin started to crack like dry earth. The shadows reached for him, wrapping around him like black vines. His screams turned to shrieks, and then he crumbled right in front of us. His body turned to dust, and the whispers stopped. The elders never spoke of what we saw that day. They told the village that the prince had died from illness, but we knew the truth. Prince Adu had traded his soul for power, and in the end, it cost him everything. Sometimes, I still hear those whispers at night. I think the spirits are still here, looking for someone new to make a deal with. I warn the young girls now, never go near the palace. I also warn the men who think they can outsmart the spirits. You see, after Prince Adu disappeared, the village tried to forget. We pretended it never happened, but the forest never forgot. Strange things began to happen. People heard whispers when they passed the palace at night. Some swore they saw shadows moving inside the empty halls, though no one lived there anymore. One boy, Kwaku, didn't listen. He was brave, foolishly so. He laughed at the elders' warnings and said the prince's story was just a tale to scare children. One night, he bet his friends that he would go to the palace and spend the night there. The next morning, Kwaku's friends found him near the palace gates. He was alive, but he was not the same. His hair had turned completely white and his eyes were wide, staring at nothing. He couldn't speak. He just sat there, whispering something over and over again. When I got close enough to hear, I froze. He was repeating the same words. They want more. They want more. Kwaku never recovered. His family moved him to another village, hoping he would get better. But I heard he died months later, mumbling those same words in his sleep. After that, no one went near the palace. The forest began to take it back. Vines crawled up the walls and trees grew where the courtyard used to be, but the whispers remained. And sometimes at night, you can see a figure standing in the doorway, a tall figure in torn robes, watching, waiting. I've thought about leaving the village many times, but I know the spirits wouldn't let me go. I was there. I saw what happened. I think they want me to remember so I can warn others. So I'm warning you now. Don't seek power in places where men aren't meant to tread. Don't make deals with things you don't understand. And if you hear whispers in the dark, don't listen, because they are still out there, and they are always hungry. Never trust a man with hungry eyes, because power always has a price, and the spirits always come to collect.